And for more on the repercussions of the Iran war and the developments in the African continent, we're delighted to be joined over the telephone by our guest for the afternoon, Dr. Ayman Ghoneim, our economic and legal expert. A very good afternoon to you, Dr. Ayman.
Good afternoon to you, madam, and to all our audience.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for your time. Always a pleasure to have you with us. And of course, let's start, Doctor, by discussing the recent reports from the United Nations and African Development Bank suggesting that the African continent could lose up to 0.2 percentage points of GDP growth in 2026 if the conflict, of course, persists. How do you see African countries recalculating possibly their national budgets in order to deal with budget cuts and absorb the shock of such losses?
Well, actually, madam, your question has two parts. The first is the loss of growth, and such loss will be suffered by most of the countries in the world, actually.
Yes.
Why? Because the present conflict in the Middle East has led and expected to continue to lead to an increase in the energy prices. Brent price, for example, increased from around $60 per barrel at the beginning of the year to around $73 per barrel on Feb 28, 2026,
yes.
On the eve of the war, and now it's around $110 per barrel.
Yes.
Now, such increases expected to spur a wave of global inflation. Now, this means that the goods and services will be less affordable to people. So the overall spending and the overall output decreases. And this is what's called the inflation that's accompanied by stagnation, or so-called stagflation. And that's why many international financial institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, and also many private global research houses like Goldman Sachs, for example,
yes,
expected that the world economy will suffer from such situation. The world economy will suffer inflation and stagnation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for the African continent, the problem with the African continent is that most of the countries here are oil importers.
Yes.
Few countries like Nigeria are oil. Nigeria and Algeria
producers
are
yes,
oil. Yeah, and Libya, of course, are oil exporters. But most of the African countries are net oil importers, and that's why they will suffer from such a problem or such a shortcoming on the one hand, and on the other hand, the economy of such countries lack resilience. It's not very well diversified,
yes,
and it's not a highly value-added economy. It's not based on the manufacturing industries, and it mostly depends on the exportation of a single or a few commodities,
mm-hmm,
and many of them are raw material.
yes,
The present circumstances actually, and all the hardships or all the difficult circumstances usually exhibit and bring to the surface the vulnerabilities of the local economies.
mm-hmm. Absolutely, Doctor. Now, of course, discussing African nations in the African continent, with fuel prices in several countries like, for example, South Africa, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, etc., all already rising by over 25%, which is quite a substantial rise in the price of fuel prices. What immediate monetary policy tools do you think these countries can, adapt or take in order to protect, the purchasing power just of their regular or average citizen? Not even businesses, just the day-to-day livelihood.
Well, actually, it's a bit premature to answer such question because, well, first of all, we have to understand the exact inflationary effect of the present war, and such inflationary effect depends on the time frame of the war. When
yes,
will the war end? Of course, we all hope that the war will end soon with a peaceful solution. But this is a political rather than an economic question. And that's why Goldman Sachs, for example, when it predicted that the oil price, or Brent price, will reach around $150 per barrel, it tied such expectation to the time frame of the war. So it's very hard for us to measure when will the war end, and hence to measure the exact inflationary impact But unfortunately, what I can confirm to you is that generally speaking, we have two types of inflation.
Yes.
We have the so-called demand-driven inflation and the cost-driven inflation. Now, if we have a demand-driven inflation, which is not the case now, it means that there is an increase in the disposable income and hence increase on the demand or increase in the demand of goods and services.
Yes.
So the central bank will have to increase the interest by small or moderate amounts. But when we have a cost-driven inflation, this means that the production cost itself increases due to the increase in the price of factors of production. Now, such increase is not accompanied by an increase in income, okay? And that's why such increase will, in its own right, lead to a reduction in demand. And therefore, when the central bank tries to increase interest to further reduce demand, to control the prices, such increases in the interest are higher than those of the demand-driven inflation. And that was the exact case during the Russia-Ukraine war in 22 and 23, when the U.S. increased, for example, its interest rates by 500 basis points to a target level of 5.25 to 5.5%. And such interest level was the highest level, I think, since 22 years before. So, and that's why, again, I'm telling you that it's very hard now for us to
predict the measures.
Or to prescribe the exact required measures, because it just depends on the time frame of the war and to what extent it will spur global inflation.
Absolutely. Right. Dr. Ayman, let's look at the other side of the coin, if you may. With traffic now moving, and ships diverting away from their usual routes and moving to South Africa, Namibia and Mauritius, for example, these ports are filling up with ships. How do you see these new hubs, if you may, turning this temporary logistical surge into a long-term investment for their countries?
Well, again, it's hard now to predict the exact outcome, because such alternative routes that you're describing are only temporary routes.
Yes.
When the war will end, things will stabilize again.
But
and
for now,
will have
yes.
Yeah, for now and for some time,
yes,
we'll have, of course, the trade shifting to these routes. But actually, we are talking about a small amount of trade, actually, because first of all, the normal international trade includes a big portion of the exportation of the Arabian Gulf oil. Okay, now such exportation is halted now, for one hand. On the other hand, if you're talking about the international trade between Southeast Asia and the West, yes, of course, some of this trade may shift to the Cape of the Good Hope, yes, but presently we don't have a real reason for such trade not to pass through Suez Canal till now. Till now, the Bab el-Mandeb Straits are not threatened, and that's why some shipping companies now prefer to go to the Cape of Good Hope in expectation of something that may just happen all of a sudden in the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. But the point is, it's difficult for countries to base their long-term growth and long-term investments on
temporary conditions.
A temporary shift in the trade routes. However, if you're talking about the economies of South Africa and Mauritius, well, these are highly promising economies.
Absolutely.
They have a lot of growth. They have a lot of growth factors, including, of course, the abundance of raw material, including the abundance of highly skilled labor, and the fact that such economies are still, to a great extent, virgin economies, meaning that they're still unsaturated economies, and they are full of opportunities, of course.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Dr. Ayman, lots of analysts argue, for example, that the African Continental Free Trade Area can finally, serve as a buffer, if you may, against the external shocks by the fast-tracking intra-Africa trade goals, specifically that are usually imported from other countries like the Middle East, for example. How do you see this, and is there room now for more intra-African opportunities and trade and investment?
Well, the inter-African trade area, it can be a long-term strategy. It can be a long-term shift for the African nations to shift towards more economic integration. In the present circumstances, it's very hard for such a trade area to become a buffer zone. Why? Because if you examine the intra-African trade, it's no more than 15 to 16% of the African foreign trade, as compared, for example, to the intra-Asian trade, which is around 60 to or 50 to 60%, and the intra-European trade, which is around 60 to 70%. Therefore, again, as I told you, or during the periods of turmoil, it's very hard for you to administer such long-term shifts, especially if there are many structural problems in the forum that you're describing. For the intra-African trade and the African free trade area, we have a lot of challenges. We have, first of all, a logistical challenge, infrastructural challenge. The African countries are not tied together with a mature railroad network, for example, or even a road network. Most of the roads, whether they are maritime routes or whether they are or whether they are airlines, yes, they are all tailored to the benefit of the trade between Africa and the Western world, or even the Eastern world and China, where Africa serves as an exporter of raw material and importer of finished and semi-finished goods. And therefore, such shortcomings, such gap has to be addressed first. Now, it's estimated that the financing gap, for example, of the African infrastructure in order to effect an effective African free trade area is or ranges between $70 to $100 billion per annum, actually. And also, we have a problem in financing the intra-African trade. Trade finance gap is around also $80 billion per annum. Such financing gap, of course, can be partially filled by the African Export-Import Bank, by the African Development Bank, but such shortcoming needs a lot of, or needs a long-term planning and long-term effort.
Absolutely.
Till we reach the stage where we can say that intra-African trade can serve as a buffer for the
external shocks. Right. I'm going to have to leave it at that. We've run out of time, but I'd like to thank you very, very much. Our dear guest, Dr. Ayman Ghoneim, our economic and our legal expert. Many thanks, sir, for your time and your insight and for joining us this afternoon. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we wrap up today's edition of Africa Today. You're in the company of myself, Angie Meher. Thank you for watching.